For years, Florida retirees have been quietly losing homes before they ever own them. Not to a neighbor and not to another family, but to a company. An all-cash offer thousands of dollars over the asking price from a corporate buyer who never once walked through the front door. And for years, Washington did nothing about it. That just changed. On the 11th of July 2026, the most serious federal restriction on corporate home buying in modern American history became law. It passed both chambers of Congress with large bipartisan majorities, and it is called the Road to Housing Act. Buried inside it is a section with a blunt and telling title: Homes are for people, not corporations. In plain terms, the largest institutional investors, the Wall Street landlords who control 350 single-family homes or more, are now barred from buying any more of them. The penalties for breaking that rule reach into the millions of dollars per home. On paper, it sounds like exactly the relief Florida buyers have been begging for. But here is what no one is telling you. This law was written with a door left open, and of all the people in Florida, that door was left open widest for one specific group: retirees. The very people the headlines say this law will help most. This is not a prediction, and it is not a proposal stuck in a committee somewhere. This is the law of the land right now, today. So today I am going to show you exactly what it does, why Wall Street came for Florida in the first place, the single piece of fine print that every Florida retiree needs to understand, and the one part of this law that is genuinely, quietly useful to you. Because the honest answer to the question, did Washington just make Florida cheaper for you, is more complicated and far more useful than any headline can hold. Let us start with why the Wall Street landlords came to Florida at all, because once you understand that, everything else falls into place. Big institutional investors do not buy homes to live in them. They buy them to rent them out indefinitely, collecting a check every single month while the value climbs underneath them. And that strategy works best in exactly one kind of place: a state with fast population growth, a steady river of new arrivals who all need somewhere to live, and a deep supply of single-family homes rather than apartment towers. That description is Florida in a single sentence. The retirees pouring in for the weather, the workers following the retirees, the families chasing the sun. To an investor staring at a spreadsheet, Florida was not a place to live. It was a yield to harvest. And so they came, by the tens of thousands, buying up ordinary single-family homes in ordinary neighborhoods and quietly converting them into rentals, one closing at a time. Redfin tracked this wave closely, and at its height, the firm reported that investors were buying close to 1 in every 4 homes sold in some of the hottest metros in the country, a pace that would have been unthinkable a decade earlier. This was not a few landlords picking up a rental here and there. It was an organized, well-funded machine, and Florida was one of its favorite hunting grounds. But here is where honesty matters, because this is the exact spot where the doom channels lie to you. These investors did not buy the whole state. They did not even come close. Nationally, the biggest institutional investors, the ones this new law actually targets, own less than 1% of all single-family homes. Count every investor of every size, the big funds and the small ones together, and it is still under 2% of the market. So anyone telling you that Wall Street owns Florida is simply wrong, and you should click away from them. What is true is far more specific and far more local and far more dangerous if you happen to be standing in the wrong neighborhood. The investors did not spread themselves thin across the country. They concentrated. They poured their money into a small handful of target metros, and 2 of the very biggest targets in the entire nation sit right here in Florida. According to the Government Accountability Office, the investigative arm of Congress itself in the Jacksonville area, corporate investors came to own more than 1 in every 5 single-family homes that are rented out. In the Tampa and St. Petersburg area, the figure climbed to around 15% of the rental homes. Those are not small slices. In the specific neighborhoods where these companies clustered hardest, they became the dominant force in the market, and a regular buyer stopped competing against other families and started competing against a corporation with a nearly bottomless supply of cash. Redfin's own tracking has shown that at the height of this wave, investors were buying a striking share of all the homes sold in these Florida metros, far above the national average. Zillow's data from those same years shows just how brutal the competition became, with homes selling in a matter of days and ordinary buyers stretching past their own limits simply to have a chance. That is the market the Wall Street landlords built. Zillow's Home Value Index tells the rest of the story, showing Florida values climbing at some of the fastest rates anywhere in the nation during those years, as this flood of investor money bid the prices up faster than local incomes could ever hope to follow. And the reason the investors could win so consistently is simple. A family buying a home needs a mortgage and inspection and appraisal and time. A large investor needs none of those things. It buys with cash, closes in days, and moves on to the next one. That speed, more than anything, is what shut so many ordinary Florida buyers out of the very neighborhoods they had lived near their whole lives. That is the market the Wall Street landlords built, and that is where the real human cost lives in the bidding war. Picture it clearly because it has happened to thousands of Florida retirees. You find the home, a modest 3-bedroom in a quiet neighborhood, the exact one you had been picturing for your retirement, close to the grandchildren, near the good hospital, on a street where you could imagine growing old. You get your financing lined up, you offer the asking price, maybe a little over, and you drive home feeling good about it for the first time in months. Then, your agent calls with the news you lost. The seller took a cash offer, several $1,000s above yours, from a buyer who waived the inspection entirely and never even scheduled a walkthrough. Because to that buyer, it was never a home. It was unit number 417 in a portfolio, one line on a balance sheet 1,000 miles away. You were not outbid by a better family. You were outbid by a business model. For an older buyer on a fixed budget, going up against an opponent that never sleeps, never gets emotional, and never runs out of money, it was never a fair fight. And for years, no one in Washington seemed to notice or care. And it did not stop at the closing table. Once these companies owned a street, they set the rents on it too, often raising them year after year with software that squeezed every possible dollar out of the tenants, many of whom were the same retirees who had been priced out of buying in the first place. So a retiree could lose the house as a buyer, then rent it back from the very company that beat them at a price that climbed every single year. That is the machine this law was finally written to confront. For years, no one in Washington seemed to notice or care. If you have lived through exactly that or watched it happen to someone you love, do me a quick favor and tap the like button, because it genuinely helps push this in front of other Florida retirees who are about to walk into the same fight without knowing the rules just changed. And the rules did change. So when this law finally passed and the headlines announced that Washington had at last gone after the Wall Street landlords, it felt like justice arriving. It felt like the fair fight was finally coming. But before you celebrate, stay right here, because there is a part of this law that the headlines skipped entirely. And once you see it, you will understand why the relief may never actually reach the very people it was named for. Here is the turn, and it is the single most important thing in this entire video. The new law does not ban institutional investors from buying every single family home. It carves out a list of exceptions, and one of those exceptions points directly at the kind of housing that Florida retirees buy into more than any other group in the country. Age-restricted senior communities. Written into the law in black and white is a specific exemption for homes that are newly built, renovated, or converted for occupancy in communities intended and operated for households with at least one member aged 55 and older. Read that slowly and let it land. The exact 55 and older developments that draw retirees to Florida by the hundreds of thousands, the gated active adult communities with the archetype being a place like the Villages, are the one corner of the entire market where this crackdown quietly steps aside. Think hard about what that actually means for you. The law that was sold to the public as protection for retirees was written so that in the communities built specifically for retirees, the big investors get to keep a lane open. The door was not just left ajar somewhere far away. It was left open in your neighborhood, in the exact type of community you are most likely to be shopping for. That does not make the entire law a scam, and I am not going to tell you it does. But it does mean the relief you were promised has a hole in it, and the hole is shaped precisely like the home you were planning to buy. The crackdown steps around the retiree, on the retiree's own street. And it is worth being precise about why that exemption exists, because it is not a conspiracy and I will not pretend it is. Lawmakers carved it out to protect the building of new senior housing so that investors would keep funding and developing the age-restricted communities that older Americans need. The intention was reasonable. But intentions do not change outcomes, and the outcome is the same either way. In the one category of Florida housing retirees are most likely to buy, the big money keeps its seat at the table. And that is why this matters more for a retiree than for almost anyone else. A younger buyer shut out of one neighborhood can simply look at 10 others. A retiree has a shorter list, a fixed budget, and a specific kind of community in mind, the very kind the law left wide open. When your options are narrower to begin with, an exemption aimed straight at them costs you the most. Now, before you write this whole law off as useless, stay with me because the story takes another turn, and this one cuts in a surprising direction. It turns out that even where this law does apply, in the ordinary neighborhoods with no age restriction at all, it may barely move the price of a home. And understanding why is what separates a buyer who gets played by headlines from a buyer who actually knows how this market works. Here is that honest truth, and it is the part that keeps this channel worth trusting. This law is real, a genuine first step, but as a rescue for your budget, it is almost certainly overstated, and I would rather tell you now than let you count on relief that is not coming. Start with the raw numbers. The mega investors this law targets own less than 1% of the nation's homes, and even in Jacksonville and Tampa, where they concentrated the hardest, all investors combined are still only a small single-digit share of every home in the market. A large share of the rentals, yes, but a small share of the whole. So removing them from the buying pool helps at the edges in specific pockets, not across the whole state. Next, and this is critical, the law does not force these companies to sell a single thing. Every home they already own, they keep. None of it comes back onto the market for you. The law only stops them from buying more. And here is the detail that quietly deflates the entire headline. According to Redfin and other industry data, corporate buying had already fallen by roughly 70% from its peak years before this law was ever signed. pushed back by higher interest rates and thinner profit margins. Zillow's value data already shows Florida prices cooling on their own, with no help from any new law at all. So in large part, this law is banning something that had already slowed to a trickle on its own. And finally, the workaround. Analysts have already pointed out that a large investor could simply split itself into smaller affiliated companies, each holding fewer than 350 homes, and slip right under the line. The law has broad control rules meant to catch exactly that, but the cat and mouse has only begun. Real law, real hole, real limits. That is the honest picture, and no headline gave it to you. And Redfin's data shows investor purchases have kept sliding quarter after quarter, well below the frenzy, which means the pressure this law targets had already been easing on its own. That does not make the law pointless. A rule that stops the machine from roaring back still matters. But do not expect your next bidding war to suddenly get easier just because a bill got signed. So if the ban itself will not rescue your budget, is there anything in this law a Florida retiree can genuinely use? There is, and it may be the most valuable thing in the entire bill for you. But before I show you exactly what it is, there is one resource worth knowing about if you are seriously weighing where to buy. I keep everything in one place, a single breakdown of 40 Florida towns, 20 that are genuinely worth buying into right now, and 20 worth staying well away from, each one with the specific reason attached, including where investor pressure runs the highest. If you want to see which side of that line a town falls on before you ever make an offer, the link is waiting in the description. But stay right here, because the one part of this law you can actually put to work for yourself is coming right now, and it is the piece nobody is talking about. Here it is. It is not the ban. It is a reporting requirement, and it is quietly the most useful thing in the entire law for an ordinary buyer. Under the new rules, every large institutional investor must now report to the Federal Department of Housing and Urban Development by city and by state exactly how many single-family homes they control, with the only exception being cities where they own 10 or fewer. Sit with what that means, because it is bigger than it sounds. For the first time in history, there is going to be a public official record showing precisely which towns in Florida are saturated with corporate ownership and which ones are wide open. Right now, that information is scattered across shell companies, hidden behind anonymous entity names, and nearly impossible for an ordinary retiree to dig up. Soon it will be a matter of public record updated every single year. That is the real gift buried in this law. Not lower prices, but sunlight. The power to know before you ever write an offer in a town whether you are about to walk into a neighborhood packed with Wall Street landlords or one where the field is finally genuinely clear. Think about how much that one tool changes the game for a careful buyer. Until now, you could tour a neighborhood, love it, and have absolutely no way of knowing that a single company quietly owned a fifth of the block and was ready to outbid you on the next listing. Soon, you will be able to look it up before you ever get in the car. And on this channel, the moment that data becomes public, we will do exactly that and put it in plain language, and that reframes the whole thing honestly, which is the only way I want to leave you with it. This law is not the sweeping rescue the headline suggested. For the retiree buying into a 55 and older community, the exemption means the biggest players may still be right there in the bidding beside you. And in the ordinary neighborhoods where the ban does apply, the effect on prices will be modest, because the investors were never more than a small share of the whole and had mostly stopped buying already. But this law is also not nothing. It is a real first line drawn in the sand, a signal that the era of totally unwatched corporate home buying is ending. And more importantly, It is a floodlight switched on over a market that spent a decade operating in the dark. The relief is thin. The transparency is real. And for a careful buyer, transparency is worth more than any headline, because transparency is something you can actually act on. So here is what to actually do with all of this. Do not wait for prices to fall because of this law, because they mostly will not. Instead, do your homework on the specific town. Ask your agent directly how much investor and corporate ownership there is where you are looking. And when that public reporting arrives, use it. And if you are set on a 55 and older community, go in with your eyes open, knowing the big buyers were handed a pass to stay in that exact market. Knowledge is the edge this law actually gives you. The rest is mostly headlines. Now, I genuinely want to hear from you because the comments on these are always the sharpest part. Have you lost a Florida home to a corporate cash buyer or watched it happen to someone you love? That call from the agent saying a company you had never even heard of just outbid you sight unseen? Tell me your town and what happened, because someone scrolling right now is about to make an offer in that exact market and needs to hear it before they do. And if this helped you understand what this law really does beyond the headline, hit the like button and subscribe, because these rules and numbers will shift fast in the coming months, and I would rather you hear the next turn from me than find out after you have signed, because that is exactly what is coming next. When that new reporting data finally lands and the map of corporate ownership across Florida becomes public for the first time, we are going to read it together, town by town. So stay with this channel, because we will name the specific Florida towns where the Wall Street landlords are packed in tightest, the places where a retiree is most likely to lose that bidding war, before you fall in love with a home in one of them.